very good case to be made that they should be selling them off as they were sold off in places like Eastern Europe and Russia after the fall of communism. Iraq was a one-party state that was modeled on both the Nazi and communist models. Saddam Hussein employed most people in state-owned industries which were horribly inefficient, which were subsidized by Saddam Hussein in order to keep political control of the country, but they can't survive. They're not efficient enough to survive in a free market, and yet those same industries are continuing to exist in free Iraq today. The Coalition Provisional Authority has not made any move to privatize those, any substantive move to privatize those industries, even though they talked about it a few months ago. They put those plans on hold because their basic calculation is that it would be too disruptive right now to do that. It would throw people out of jobs. It would be disruptive to the security situation. So in fact, they're not doing what the emailer described in a very tendentious fashion.
And last email in this lot from John Baker in Houston, Texas. He writes, in foreign policy, neoconservatives have argued that it is incumbent upon America as the sole remaining superpower to project its power around the world in support of American geostrategic goals. Doesn't neoconservative foreign policy simply come down to might makes right?
No, in fact, that's not the case at all. In fact, neocons are much more concerned with what's right than a lot of other factions on the political landscape. Neoconservatives are very much more concerned with what's right and wrong in places like North Korea and Iran. I can't speak for anybody else, but I'm very worried about the terrible conditions in which the people of North Korea and Iran and other dictatorships have been placed. I feel tremendously for them, not only when when you see tens of thousands of people die in an earthquake, but also the day-to-day oppression under which those people suffer. And I think that, in fact, America has made some very cynical calculations in the past that we will cut deals with dictators from the Soviet Union to Saudi Arabia to various others, and allegedly this will advance our national interests. But in fact, neocons are the people who are saying, no, let's not be amoral in our foreign policy. Let's think about what's right and what's wrong and realize that doing the right thing morally is often also means doing the right thing politically and from our own national security interests. And so I think we ought to be doing more to promote our ideals. And so it's just a caricature and a travesty to describe that position as might makes right. In fact, that's the opposite of the truth.
We have 10 minutes left in our hour with Max Boot of the Council on Foreign Relations. Next call, Asheville, North Carolina. Good morning, caller.
Good morning. Susan, you're looking lovely today. I'd like to say, yes, this whole, I've been a lifelong Republican voter for almost 30 years, and there's a lot of talk and bad-mouthing George Bush just because there's voter irregularities in the state of Florida, and people say, well, that's Jeb's state. There must be something fishy going on here, or that George Bush was convicted for drunk driving, and that Dick Cheney was doubly convicted for drunk driving. I mean, you know, people just slinging mud. And even if it is true, I still believe that we're doing the right thing in Iraq, and the fact that Saddam has been brought down. You know, people say that he wasn't a legitimate target, and that there were other interests, that all the oil barons that have high positions, Condoleezza Rice being affiliated with Chevron and such, that were over there for oil. And I just don't see it. It just don't make no sense to me.
Thank you very much. Mr. Root, if not a comment for him, I'll move on.
Go ahead.
All right. Prescott, Arizona next.
Yes, good morning, Max, Susan, and happy holidays to you.
Thank you.
Max, you talked earlier about evil. I want to give you a quote, and I didn't say this, so don't attack me, but it says, the love of money is the root of all evil. Now, the key word being all. That was said by Jesus in 1 Timothy chapter 6, I believe. And so it tells me, follow the money. My other comment is, you really cheered us on for going after the weapons of mass destruction over there. Thanks to C-SPAN, I watched Senator Byrd read from the inventories of the weapons of mass destruction that we gave them in the first Bush administration, and along with books of how to make it and how to use it. Now, you were saying let's do the right thing. I would like to hear your comments on if you think that's right. I'm sorry to be heavy on you, But look into both of these things, and it might open your eyes a little bit. And I appreciate C-SPAN. Happy New Year to you both. And let's do something right for our country and become America. I'm a vet. I'm an American, and I'm damn proud of it. And unfortunately, a lot of people that are taking us down the thing and taking the money and profiteering, like that woman from New York said, she was right on with this. And the country's waking up, and thank God they are.
Mr. Booth?
Well, on the profiteering point, again, I must be the poorest war profiteer in the world, because I'm not making any money off of all these supposedly lucrative oil deals that explain why we're actually in Iraq. And I think that's, as the previous caller alluded to, it just doesn't add up. You know, again, this is basically just conspiracy mongering, which, in fact, Iraq is costing us a huge amount of money. I mean, everybody knows that Congress passed an $87 billion bill. We're not making money off of Iraq. We're spending tens of billions of dollars. It's a huge drain, and that was fully anticipated by a lot of people, including me, who thought that opposing Saddam Hussein was the right thing to do. I don't think anybody thought that this was going to make money for the United States or make money or be a lucrative proposition. It was a very costly proposition. It's costly in money. It's also even more costly, obviously, in the lives of our young men and women who are over there. You know, I think President Bush's position is that this is a sacrifice we have to make in order to make the world freer, in order to make ourselves safer. And I hope that is, in fact, the way it works out.
Who or what are some of the greatest influences in your own thinking?
That's a tough question, Susan. That's a classic C-SPAN question. I know Brian Lamb has perfected that art of questioning, which is asking supposedly simple questions, which are actually very hard to answer. I would have to give it some thought. I mean, a lot of people have shaped my thinking, and one of them was somebody who just died recently, Bob Bartley, who was the longtime editor of the Wall Street Journal and somebody I worked under for 8 years. There are also people like Bill Kristol, who's now the editor of the Weekly Standard. Many others, David Brooks, who's a columnist for the New York Times. Also many people I didn't know, just people whose writing I've read over the years, people like Winston Churchill or many other great writers. I mean, there have been so many influences, it's hard for me to pick out one or two.
And sort of staying with the personal side of this and just understanding you and your thinking, at what point in your own career development did you say, this is how I want to devote my professional time? Advancing this kind of thinking, going in this direction, spending your life doing this, in other words.
Well, you know, I sort of fell into it. I never thought I could do this full time. I mean, I just started off, I wanted to get a job in journalism. I've always enjoyed writing, and so I just felt myself lucky to find employment at a place like the Christian Science Monitor or the Wall Street Journal, and then I was never really thinking about leaving the Wall Street Journal, and then the Council on Foreign Relations came along and offered me a job, and I hesitated, but then I finally took it, and I've been having a ball at the Council, just basically thinking and writing about some of the problems that we face in the world, and also about military history, which is really my first love, and something which I spend most of my time doing in writing books about.
We talked about your next book coming out, which is a military history book, but look to the future. What are the requirements of wars that will be fought in the ensuing generations, technologically?
Susan, that's the third extremely tough question in a row.
Sorry.
You know, I think that's very hard to predict. I think the biggest requirement certainly is going to be for information, to move information as quickly as possible, to gather information, to make use of information. One of the big problems that we've been facing in Iraq is a lack of information about the enemies that we face. We don't know enough about the people who are attacking us in Iraq, and that's why we've had a trouble putting an end to the wave of terrorism that has swept the country. So that's certainly something we have to focus on, is greater intelligence gathering, and also moving from intelligence to action, moving from discovering information to acting upon it. That's a huge challenge, especially for a military like ours, which is very bureaucratized, very large, which has a lot of people who are very good at blowing things up and shooting people, but not that many people who are really expert in speaking foreign languages, for example, or integrating into a foreign country like Iraq and really getting their ear to the ground and figuring out what's going on. I think that's going to be a huge challenge, and that's going to be as big of a challenge as anything purely technological that we face in the near future.
Monroe County, Tennessee, for Max Boot.
I have to say I admire this young man for his patience and also the hostess. The gentleman mentioned the crazies they call. I agree with him so much. I'm 23-year watcher of this program, and how you don't get up and throw bricks back at them, I can't imagine. And that's about all.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Good morning. I have a question for Mr. Booth, and I also have some points I want to make. One of the questions is, Mr. Booth, why is it that we can't hold the president accountable when he said the main reason for going into Iraq was because of weapons of mass destruction and that Saddam was an imminent threat? Why is that so wrong? Because that's what stood out in my mind, and I'm pretty sure in the minds of Americans across this country. Second point I want to make, Mr. Booth, you talked about evil. Well, I want to talk about some evil that is going on in this administration. Number one, I think it's evil because of the recklessness of the fiscal irresponsibility that this president has shown across this country. And when I say fiscal irresponsibility, I'm talking about the debt that has been created because of tax cuts and reckless spending. Evil, I think, is when the president tries to undo the way overtime is paid in this country. That's evil. I think it's evil when American jobs are being outsourced to foreign countries, and this administration turns their head, don't even pay any attention to that, and Americans are losing their jobs left and right.
Okay, thanks. Let me jump in because our time's running out, and would you deal with the American debt issue, please?
Well, I would join previous callers at this point in suggesting that we ought to be careful about using the word evil, and I think particularly careful in using it in a domestic political context. I think the word evil really ought to be reserved for people like Kim Jong-il, who kills and murders and oppresses hundreds of thousands of his own people, or Saddam Hussein. I would not use the word evil in a domestic political context over what are essentially policy disputes, and I think this is very disruptive and corrosive to our political life when that kind of extremist language is used, because I actually agree with the caller that I wish we weren't racking up so much debt. I wish that we were curbing government spending. But we can agree or disagree on those kinds of issues without labeling our opponents as being evil. These are just policy disputes where we can, I think we should admit that people of goodwill can disagree about it and reserve evil for cases where it's really warranted. In cases like Iran and North Korea, and my concern is if we throw the word evil around too loosely in a domestic context, it loses its power when it's applied to the few cases where it really is appropriate.
Now, our time is short, but do you have some more for her on why it is wrong to hold the president accountable for war positioned on WMD?
I think the president should be held accountable. Now, at the moment, 60% of the public supports the war effort in Iraq. So I guess you would have to say that maybe 40% of the public is mad with President Bush about it, but the vast majority is not. The caller, by the way, repeated a myth which has gained a lot of currency, which is that President Bush said the threat from Saddam Hussein was imminent. In fact, he said the exact opposite. If you go back to his State of the Union address, when he laid out the case, he said the threat is not imminent. If the threat were actually imminent, I don't think anybody, including Howard Dean, would disagree with the action that we took. He said the threat was not imminent, but it was a grave and gathering danger, one that was building, and so he wanted to head it off before the threat was imminent. That's what he did. Whether Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction or what the extent of his inventory was at the time that we invaded Iraq is still unclear. Clearly, I think there were some exaggerations made by the administration by the intelligence community and by others, but that doesn't negate the basic case for the war, which is that Saddam was a danger down the line. We know that he has tried to get weapons of mass destruction in the past. He certainly had the capability to manufacture and acquire them in the present. We know he has used weapons of mass destruction in the past. We know that he has violated numerous